Okay, so my goal with it was that I went to a poetry reading at the school, and I noticed how many creative outlets people had. You know, different people were doing it through their music, through writing originals, and I don't really write originals.
Right.
Or doing it through.
You're not a poet.
I actually don't like poetry all that much, but I got something really valuable out of it.
Yeah.
Was just
I'm
to
kind of
think
with
about-
you too on the poetry thing.
Yeah.
I've tried.
I've tried, and I can't get it to come out where it's just not like either overly cliche or simplistic
Right.
or.
Do you
where it's
enjoy
something-
reading it or?
Not really. No.
Yeah, I tried the other day. I got Camille
Paglia?
Paglia's history of poetry.
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't know what it was like her 50 most important poems, and I'm like, I'm gonna give it a try again, and I just couldn't get
Couldn't
into
get through
it.
it, yeah.
I couldn't get into it. It's just not my bag.
And people, I think people are just wired differently for what they can get into.
Yeah, and people change too. Like I used to really dislike movies. I thought it was like an inferior art form back when I was super obsessed with music. And,
Right.
And I thought like the hierarchy of arts was like music, books, painting, all sorts of stuff, then movies.
Oh, I see.
But I've actually switched now.
Well, movies have gotten a lot more complicated with how they portray the story, not just the
Right.
actions
Yeah.
within them.
Yeah, like TV has done that too because you have these really long form TV shows
And you can develop the story a
where
lot further.
the character development is
Yeah, you
really
get better narratives. It's more episodic. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
otherwise, you sit down for 2-hour movie and it's done with.
well. You
But
know
you
what's
get more character
interesting?
development
Yeah,
throughout the whole TV show, like Breaking Bad. You get this character, and then throughout the whole duration of the show, you start to care about this character and you get to know more about him. That's just an example. I'm just throwing that out there.
Oh no.
yeah.
Yeah.
But what came out of that is since I stayed away from movies for 20 years, now it's like, oh my God, I got so much catching up to do. And there's so much good stuff out there.
True. So for me, I looked at this as my expressive outlet. Just doing more recordings and podcasts and conversations, and I have so many good conversations. It's like, wow, it'd be nice if I could record that and get more out of it.
Yeah.
Sometimes I hear somebody say something, and then a week later, I'm like, I get another thought in addition to that, and I amend it and I add to it, or I learn that something that I thought was original wasn't that original, and there's somebody who thought something else a little bit differently,
Sure,
but that's
yeah.
similar enough that I could add to my own thoughts.
As Pablo Picasso once said, a great artist steals, but a greater artist copies.
Yeah.
Or something like that to that effect.
Yeah. So Jason, do you want to introduce us?
Yes, Andre, I will. Welcome to Little Less Than Random with your host, moi, Jason.
And I'm Andrew, and our special guest today,
I'm Jeff.
oh, as we call Coyote sometimes.
Nickname Coyote.
Yeah.
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 That's like the music stage name. That's where that came
Right.
from.
Should we have nicknames too?
Just Coyote.
Or just first name basis? All right.
Well, because that kind of came naturally. Do you want to tell us a story?
Pardon me?
Yeah,
How
there
I
was a
got
story.
that
Yeah,
name?
yeah. There was a cool story that goes along with that, right?
Sort of. Well, like I said, it's a music name.
Okay.
A stage name, and it that name has stuck with me for so long. Like I'm 40. What year is it? I'm 47.
2019, no, almost 2020.
I'm 47. And
Am I as old as you were when I met you?
I don't think so. I
I'm
think
getting close, right?
maybe. Yeah.
It's kind of interesting to think how long our friendships have.
Yeah.
spanned.
It's been a long time.
I've known Jason
I-
since middle school,
That's crazy. That's
Yeah.
awesome.
That was from a different life. That's before even.
but that's before we really
Met
knew each other
officially,
that
right.
well.
Yeah.
Like, I just remember seeing you. I wasn't your friend then.
Well, we didn't know we
because,
were in
like you
different
said-
tracks, I
Maybe like
think.
you said, you were socially awkward.
Yeah.
And so
Well, we
was
were
I.
talking about
Apparently
social
cringy,
awkwardness.
Yeah.
which I don't agree with.
Well, okay, so
I don't think you were
that
cringy.
actually might be a good topic to touch on. So we were talking about how people are socialized and
Mm-hmm.
some of the common wisdom of how people treat their kids. So some people don't let their kids go outside in their front yard,
Yep.
and that was me. And so if you think about from a early childhood development standpoint,
Mm-hmm.
some people get the very worst of that, but for good reason because people are trying to protect their kids.
Yeah, but you could be overprotective, and I think that the worst thing that could happen to a kid is to grow up naive, because then you could get manipulated by anybody, and it's like just the opposite of being independent.
Right. And you're like that with your kids. You let them, they have their neighborhood like kind of friends, right?
Yep. Yeah, I give them a lot of freedom. I try and let them grow up like it was the 1980s.
Yeah,
you
and
know,
it's
with
way safer.
limited screen time, and
Steven Pinker's pretty much pointed out that it's way safer than it ever was
it's
in the 80s.
way safer than it's ever been.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think in the 90s it was legitimately bad, and that's when I was a kid.
It
That's
depends
where I
on where you were.
disagree.
Yeah, it depends on where you were.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay.
And you grew up in Moval, both of you guys?
I grew up in Mobile.
Riverside, then Mobile.
Riverside. So what was it like back then?
Oh, a lot of wasteland, and
Yeah.
then commercial buildings came along.
Do you think it was dangerous?
Dangerous? Oh no, because I just mostly stayed at home playing video games.
Oh, well,
Okay.
yeah. So different.
Well,
Yeah.
it's not. Yeah, exactly. But then
Yeah.
staying home playing video games is dangerous too, because you don't go outside, you don't get any exercise,
And you don't
you're
get that
unhealthy,
stimulation, right?
and you don't get the
cognitive
socialization.
stimulation.
Yeah.
So I was telling you when we first met. It's a kid chase. When we first met, I felt like kind of my first adult group of. Well, I literally was. Becoming an adult was like my first adult group
How
of
old were
friends.
you again when we met?
20. I think I
Okay.
just turned 20.
Because I remember going to Crafton College when I moved here, and I just wanted to meet more musicians. But in terms of like the timeline, I remember walking up those dark stairs in
Right.
the auditorium, and Obama had just become elected president.
No, this was way before that.
Was that way before?
Oh no,
this?
wait, maybe no, it wasn't. Never mind.
I have
I'm
that
being
memory,
dumb.
but
No,
maybe
it was. This was about 2008.
Yeah.
That's right. Sorry.
so. That is when we met.
Yeah,
around
that is.
then? Okay,
Sorry,
yeah.
I got way off there in my time.
You got confused in the timeline.
But that's right.
This
Yeah.
isn't Terminator, so don't relax.
I haven't watched that yet. I gotta watch
Yeah,
it.
that's our
That's our
next
next
podcast.
podcast.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Talking
Yeah.
about wokeness.
So we were talking about cringeworthiness, and when I hear people kind of make fun of or socially outcast somebody who's a little bit cringeworthy,
Yep.
I feel bad for that person because
I know.
I very easily see that I could have gone that other direction because
Sure.
I hadn't interacted with a lot of people
Right.
before then,
Yep.
and I didn't know how to act.
So when you
in
say
a
you're
group.
cringe-worthy, are you meaning you're socially awkward?
Well, social awkwardness, like you don't know how to act within a group of your peers.
Yeah, I was that guy.
And there's a way that
And a lot of that's perfectly normal too, as part of
or how to portray masculinity, what to say, what like people who
Yeah.
feel like they have to talk a certain way about,
Right,
let's
yeah.
say even women, you don't know, and you just don't know what to say and know what to do and how to act and how to pursue that in
Yep,
a
yep.
way that makes sense to who you are.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
so in a way, you guys sort of socialized me, and so I was like, oh, you guys are my friends. I was kind of
We
surprised.
socialized you?
In a
Oh,
way.
man, I feel sorry for you.
Yeah, you guys taught me how to
Okay,
drink
that
and how to-
explains a lot about how you're acting now.
Well, I think it went pretty well overall. Yeah, it didn't turn out too bad.
Andrew,
yeah.
Okay, how do you think you and I came about? I think we have a lot of things that
Well, I think we have a lot in common.
really, because I would say the opposite. I think we're like an unlikely
But-
friendship.
Well, I think we have a lot in common with like how we interact with people, and I've always had an eclectic group of friends in general. So like it's the underlying things beyond just the interest.
I think I
Right.
like.
Sure.
So like somebody might be interested in comics, somebody might be interested in movies, somebody might be interested in reggae music, like, and I'm saying
Wrestling.
things that we like, or me basketball,
Me
but
wrestling.
or wrestling, but the underlying things, like the underlying value structures of how you treat somebody, what you do, and
Right.
If either of you guys called me and said, "Hey, I need help with blank," I
Right.
know
Yeah,
that
yeah.
if I can, I would be like, "Yeah, sure."
Sure, yeah.
And
yeah.
and I know that mutually, and you, I think both of you have done the same for me, so that's that's
okay,
really
cool.
cool. Yeah,
Kind of like the universal laws of
reciprocity.
unwritten rules
Yeah.
of polite society and
Yeah.
what have you.
I mean, yeah, we could all be different. We can have different interests. But at the end, if we get along, we're just fine.
Yeah, and I think I've always liked people to be different from me in a way because
too.
I've always liked
I'm with you on
interacting
that.
with people. I'm just more entertained by that. It's like they bring
Right.
something new
Yeah.
that I don't know.
Here's
Exactly.
something mind blowing.
Yeah.
Here's something mind blowing. If we're all different, does not make us all the same.
Well, that's like the all for all special. That's a different topic. Like if we're all special, like the trophy thing. Like if everybody gets a trophy.
For sure. Like, trophy generation. That's like, just wrong.
Yeah, so not all different is good, right? Is that what you're saying?
I mean, it's a paradise. If we're all different, doesn't mean we're all the same.
Well, because when
'Cause
people
you're-
say like we're all different, they're trying to equate it. Is that what they're trying to? It's like a secondary motive. They're not just trying to point out the difference. They're trying to say it's all equal or it's all good.
Right.
But it can very easily not.
Yeah,
be good.
there's no
so
equality,
So
for
I like a
sure.
lot of differences, but not all differences are cool. I don't want my
Exactly.
friends to, every time I invite them over to my house, I'm going to be missing something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, I mean we can be different, and we just want any of that radical differences.
Yeah. Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Like you want to associate yourself with a sociopath, would you?
Exactly.
No, right. I
Yeah.
don't want to. Yeah. But that's what I was saying. That there's something underlying value structure that feels to me very similar that
Right.
I connect with.
Yeah.
So,
I wonder how different, like, what type of spectrum that's on, though. Like, do you have friends that are like have way different worldviews than you? Like, say somebody
Well,
like,
I've had relationships
who believes in
like that.
really crazy conspiracy theories or something. 'Cause
Yeah.
I would see that as being opposite of your personality.
Yeah. Well, and I have. Yeah, I have. In fact,
I like
don't-
knowing people
I
like
don't
that,
know
too.
what it was because I think I was actually attracted to that for a long time.
Yeah.
And well, the other thing too is I wonder how many conspiracy theories I believe in that I don't even know about. So I often teach in my class, like I use as an example of websites because people generally think that if it's .com, it's worse than .org and .edu. And they don't understand the differences between the perspectives and the worldviews. So, like, if you go to like CBU, Cal Baptist University, it's a .edu, and they're going to teach their mission statements drastically different because it's a religiously based university.
Right.
And so, even we had a guest speaker who got her master's from CBU the other day, and she, the number of times she brought in her religion and spiritual health to talk about mental health, mental awareness to me,
Yeah.
got to a level that was a little uncomfortable. And so but you can find perfectly good information on a .com potentially.
Yeah.
And the reverse, I often look at GMOs, genetically modified organisms, or genetically modified food. Everything we eat is genetically modified, and it's a meaningless term.
Is it genetically modified.org?
Well, there's a non-GMO project. Is such a beautiful looking website that's so clean. I even saw Joe Rogan on a recent podcast using it to try to talk negatively against veganism, and it's just unscientific, and yet it's pervasive. You can't go to the store without seeing a non-GMO sticker. And so when you see something that's so readily believed to be true, readily accepted, you wonder how many things are flying under the radar in your own perception.
Sure.
And then you get all these Instagram thoughts promoting veganism.
Oh, you were thinking thoughts like THOU.
No, thoughts as in T
Not THOTS.
HOTS.
Yeah.
That's why I said Instagram thoughts.
Okay.
For those of you out there, I mean like
Yeah.
hoes.
I knew what that meant.
And I don't mean hoes as in a garden hose. I mean women who are narcissistically into themselves, posting selfies, and they're saying they're vegan. But come on. I mean, look at Morrissey's vegan and he has cancer.
Well, people, if you live long enough, you're going to get cancer, and some of that's a genetic component. And you being a cancer survivor, you understand that.
Yeah, well, I love me too much.
Well, there's that too.
I mean, regardless of what you do, bad shit happens.
So, could this be a transition? Because I asked you to come because you were interested in this documentary you had watched called One Child Nation, which was related to climate change, and that's one of the reasons people abstain from eating meat. And there are many ways that people are trying to address the
Different
issues
factors involved,
of climate change, famine,
Pestilence.
overpopulation.
War.
So did you catch you thought there was a reference to climate change in
Well,
One
no,
Child
no,
Nation?
not explicitly. To me, it seemed more of like an economic and which it failed as an economic solution.
Yeah.
In a way.
I didn't see it as economic but
More of a famine thing.
yeah, just too many mouths to feed. They were paranoid that they were going to starve, that starvation would.
But I mean, I just like yesterday, I saw this article, and maybe you guys can both tell me what you think about it, where it was somebody who wrote an article saying, I got a vasectomy because of climate change.
Right. And you got to wonder how many of those people that say things like that were not going to have children to start with.
I know, right? I think this guy, because he also writes in there that if he gets rid of his 15 mile per gallon truck, he would save this many tons of carbon. And if he doesn't have a kid,
that's a true incel.
well, and if he doesn't have, and if he doesn't have a kid, if he doesn't have a child with his new wife, then he saves X number of carbon. But that's kind of a weird thing because he's not saving the carbon. His child, his hypothetical child, that's not really in existence.
Yeah.
It's so it might just be a justification to not change his habits of driving a 15 mile per gallon truck. Those aren't two things like either or. You could do both.
And some people, they just don't want to have kids.
Yeah.
Or, it's kind of pervasive in society now, this idea of not having kids. And I think a lot of people are just regurgitating cliches that they've heard.
And on that note, there's a lot of children, out there without parents versus children that need to be brought into this world being born. So think about those. Yeah, why bring children to the world when we have children without parents?
But is that really true? Because I don't know if there is that many orphans these days, especially in this country. There used to be a lot.
Well, we are bringing them from with the China thing, we were adopting from other countries.
There's orphans from other countries, yeah. Mm-hmm. But if you wanted to have kids here, it's not like you could go and just go to the orphanage and pick one up.
Right. It's really hard.
There's older kids without parents,
Mm-hmm.
And they have a hard time finding placement, I think.
Yeah.
Because it's hard to adopt a older
either way,
kid.
Less population. That or we need a new plague,
A new that would be awful because the thing is that I think here's what China thought they could do. Right. They thought that if they intervene so that no children are born, then there's no consciousness. Like this goes along with vegetarianism. Is the idea is you don't eat things that are conscious that have the ability to suffer. Right. And it just went way wrong because then it extended to kids that were born already just being left out in the street because the incentive structure and the value system.
So what do you mean? What do you mean? Maybe explain that a bit more.
So it went right. So if people just use contraception and didn't have kids, that could be ethical.
Yes.
Right. It could be. Right.
Yeah.
But when people were having, let's say late term abortions where there's a viable fetus, or let's say they were just leaving their kids out in the streets and hoping somebody would pick them up,
which they never did.
No, there were those guys that were picking them up and taking them to the orphanage.
Once they started having
more
Americans getting the orphans, but a lot of them just died of exposure.
Just tons of horrible, and probably the cruelest. One of the cruelest, worst deaths, right? Because some of them were alive for like 2 days, getting picked apart by mosquitoes, and so we don't want to.
And it was overwhelmingly girls too that were. That was another unintended consequence.
The value system was, but in a value system that doesn't look at male genetics passing along the male name, that you could imagine that it could work in a different environment with different value systems.
Yeah.
Potentially. So it's not inherently evil, right? Would you agree?
I don't know. It does sound inherently evil.
If people just choose people are kind of doing it now by choice. They're just choosing to have fewer kids.
Yeah, if it's a personal choice, then it's not evil in any way. I don't think
it's the imposition on others.
The fewer,
it's
the better.
Having somebody in power telling you how, if and when and how many children you could have. I think that is inherently evil. There's just something so wrong with that. Because as a human, that's you should be allowed to have as many kids as you want.
Yeah.
And then you see a lot of people on welfare with
Well,
7 kids.
that's the argument, right? Is then you have people, while people make the really hard sacrifice to not have kids, you have people having 7 kids.
Right. Sure. Yeah.
Trust me, I know this because I work at Walmart.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so it's easy.
Well, some people are going to have no kids. Some people are going to have 1 or 2, and then there's going to be some families they just want to have
But what are
lots
the
of
motives
kids.
of having kids?
Is that how you feel as a vegetarian? Because there was a while where I didn't understand. I legitimately was just kind of a bad person. Where it's like, if somebody
you didn't
said-
understand
I didn't
why-
understand vegetarianism. I
Oh,
didn't really.
okay.
I
Right.
hadn't put much thought into it, and now that I
Yeah.
have,
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
incredibly sympathetic to the suffering of animals.
Mm-hmm.
But when somebody would say, "Oh, I'm not going to eat meat," I'm like, "Oh, I guess I have to eat twice as much now." Right? And it's like I'll undo all the good that this person
Just
doing.
remember
Sure,
something,
yeah.
Andrew.
Is that frustrating to you? I mean,
Not at all.
Oh, really?
No, it's
Okay.
just like it's a personal choice.
Yeah.
And I don't want to inflict it on anybody.
Right.
And it's it's not for everybody.
Yeah.
Some people need to eat meat.
Yeah.
That it's healthier for them, and
Yeah.
and for a lot of people, having a meat heavy diet is actually healthy.
I mean, how do you think we survive from a hunter-gatherer? I mean, we come from a
Exactly.
hunter-and-gatherer
Right, yeah.
society.
It's so ingrained in our DNA to eat meat. I think.
Yeah.
And so I can't criticize anybody for doing it. The only thing I think I could get on my high horse about is I think the treatment of animals
I was going to say
in a factory farm
It's-
is indefensible.
I agree. Yeah.
And I think if that was changed, made better, I think that would go
Yeah.
really.
And so you do
long
it
way.
more for that reason.
That's
the
why I'm
treatment
doing
of animals.
it. Yeah,
That's the strongest
I feel like it's a
motivator for me.
sacrifice
Yeah.
for myself because it's like, I could see some fried chicken and I'm like, oh my god,
That looks good.
that looks good.
Yeah.
And
And
it
that
sure
brings-
smells good.
Oh, I can't wait till there's the Memphis meats, the artificial. Well, it's not artificial; it's real meat. But
Is it lab grown meat?
It's lab grown meat. It's
Okay.
synthesized meat that is genetically identical. It's actually cleaner. No,
Right.
no waste. No, like nothing's getting into like slaughterhouses aren't pristine and clean and bacteria.
Yeah,
free.
that's true.
Yeah,
Yeah.
And just so you know, Andrew, like if the cow or chicken tasted good, it didn't die in vain. Just remember that.
Well, it did. Yeah, right. But it didn't. And so I think what Jeff's saying is like it doesn't have to suffer additionally beyond that. Like it could live a cow's life,
Right.
and then it could have a quick, ethical, painless death.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what
and
you're
a
saying,
lot of
right.
a lot of the suffering is just
Because we're trying to
It's
increase
the-
the volume.
is the volume and all the suffering up until the point of it
Yeah.
getting.
And it's not even in our own best interest because there's ancillary arguments like the bacteria and the use of antibiotics and antibiotic resistance that almost any sensible person
Right.
would think that that's
Yeah.
horrible. Yeah.
And food, the whole food thing it's complicated because there's so many people and like just thinking about the best ways of raising food, and the most efficient ways. It gets really complicated, and a lot of it's tied down. And like you said, is that way back when we were hunter gatherer, or way even before that. The fact that we were able to figure out how to kill animals and how to create fire and cook the meat, it was probably the biggest evolutionary step that humans have
Yeah.
ever taken, and it's all because of meat. And
Yeah.
This is a vegetarian.
Yeah.
saying
Yeah.
this.
Right. And
So
Well,
I could see why people love their steak.
Yeah.
Because I think it goes. I think there's a piece of us in our DNA that is still goes back that far and is still connected to that
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
biological urge.
Yeah.
So that's why I think lab meat is promising.
I know I'm excited.
Yeah.
I'll eat a few, and they're like marginally worse for you. Those new fake soy patties, the Beyond Meat and the
Or is it Impossible?
Impossible
is it
Burger.
Beyond or
There's
is it Impossible?
there's both
There's
of
a
those.
bunch of them.
Yeah.
I think it's in Beyond Impossibly Stupid.
What was funny was
Stupid joke there.
we'll go back to maybe the one child, one nation thing, but I had a friend on Facebook recently. Imagine somebody has a picture of a burger, a hamburger, and says, you know what the number one killer of people is in the US is heart disease, and they're saying you should eat a hamburger. What would you say to that person?
I don't know. I honestly don't know, because you get so... This is my problem with health, is you get... Some people say, this is really bad for you, and then some people will say the opposite.
Right. Well,
And
the hamburger probably looks like the traditional food pyramid. You have your carbohydrates. You have 2 pieces of bread, right? And you've got some vegetables on it, some
Right.
veggies on it, and then you have your protein in the middle, right?
Yep,
So it looks like the food pyramid. Well,
These studies are crazy, though, because
okay.
what if the people that are eating meat are just eating hot dogs and hamburgers, and they're eating buns and French fries and pop
French fries
to go
every
with
day.
it, and then your study is like completely screwed from
oh
the
yeah,
start.
yeah. Did you say pop?
Yeah.
So yeah.
Oh, okay.
Oh yeah, right. Okay.
Sorry.
No, it's cool. So right, and so like if you switch to a vegan diet, it's not necessarily that vegan is better. It's just that you're now eating normal food. That's not fake. It's not all.
Vegan could be. Oh yeah, I guess.
Well,
but
or it could be-
vegetarian could be really fake too.
Yeah,
like
it could be
those
Oreos.
veggie burgers.
Oreos are well, yeah. So that's what I was gonna get to is that so the veggie burgers, if you are at risk of heart attack and you're on a low sodium diet, those veggie burgers are packed with salt. And
Right,
so
yeah. They're kind of, some of them are frankenfood. There's a lot of weird stuff that goes in them, and you don't even know what's
and so
in 'em.
I like them because they you're not killing an animal. No animal has to die for it.
Right.
But
Or is there?
What about the
Oh, I hope.
plants?
oh, the
Well,
plants,
Are
yeah.
they sentient too?
They're apparently like eating just vegetarian food, like just farming in general kills a lot of animals too. You just don't know it.
Oh,
but
yeah.
it's like rodents, right? Like
Yeah,
mice
so
and gophers.
I'm less
and-
concerned about the suffering of rodents as I am about a cow. That's I think far more sentient.
yeah.
But I mean,
Well, maybe.
St. Peter Singer might argue with me. People might argue with me.
Yeah.
But okay, so
We
going
are
back-
pretty close to rats,
Yeah.
though. I mean, whenever there's
Yeah,
a psychological
I know,
study,
right.
they do rats.
I know, right? That is funny. Yeah. that's
Apparently, in terms of
true. Our dopamine receptors are like apparently
yeah,
similar.
like we have
yeah.
a lot of similarities. I don't know. Is it really fair to put a
threshold
pig
or a.
over top of a rat?
Well, Peter Singer would say I'm speciest. Yeah, he has sort of this threshold, and once that threshold's kind of almost like
Right.
a light. That once that light's on,
I would
then
put
it's-
a rat over a chicken. I'll tell you that.
really.
Yeah.
Oh, I never thought of it.
Chickens are dumb, man. And rats are smart.
Okay.
But then the treatment of chickens is also indefensible,
awful, yeah.
right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's
Probably
this
be
is
really
how
awful.
this stuff gets so complicated.
So so here this goes further though. So this friend who showed this picture, now imagine something that's marginally worse from you than a hamburger. Like almost everybody would agree, eating hamburgers all the time is not going to improve your heart disease. Let's say that is actually the baseline. If the control is you used to
I
eat
don't
ham-
even know anymore because I hear studies about
Okay.
all meat diets that are actually pretty healthy.
Well,
for
okay,
people.
so let's try to use this as a control. I want to try to set this up as a scientific experiment. You haven't changed anything in your habits or eating.
Mm-hmm.
You already know that as is, not doing anything differently, you're at risk of heart attack, right?
Right.
The one thing you think you're doing right is you exchange the hamburger for a fake burger that's marginally worse.
So the fake burger is marginally worse for you?
Yeah.
Okay.
You don't want to go around saying that that's great.
Right.
Like, and so this person went around, and they got some pushback from people who were saying, like, well, you probably shouldn't eat this either. Like, there are good vegan diets, there are bad vegan diets. You
Yeah.
can eat Oreos and French fries every day, and that's vegan. And so
That's how a lot of people start, but becoming vegetarians.
And what's funny was that this person, not once would they take the, do the take the epistemic humility to say, okay, maybe this isn't the best thing to do, but it's good for animals. Because I comment on this, like, well, this is really good for the animals. That's the reason to do it.
Yeah.
But it may be marginally worse for your health.
Right.
Which is small.
Sure.
Small.
Yeah.
It's like,
and that, I think that's
you don't die from eating one vegan burger.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And for most people, I think we
But
could.
you'll regurgitate.
You were good to.
I think we could safely say that for most people, the best diet is a wide variety of things, mostly vegetables.
That's why I do keto.
But for a lot of people, that's not true either.
Yeah.
Some people are like 100% vegan works for them, and all the way to 100% meat.
Meat, right?
But,
Which is like
you
the
know,
Jordan
there's-
Peterson's.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the do you know if the fake meat or the lab meat is good for the environment in general? Like, say if you were going to look at it from a climate change perspective, like the whole process of creating and growing the lab meat. I don't know, like, what it takes.
It's
in the
supposed to be
factory.
environmentally efficient. Like it's supposed to utilize the energy much more efficiently.
Okay, so it's
done
not
in the lab.
spewing
Yeah.
pollution
That's
from a factory.
and that's kind of what we hear. I don't know if that's true, but the idea too is that if it's more efficient, it also should be cheaper at some point. It's
Right.
it's a thing of scaling it up.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of interesting. I think that we're lucky that I was talking to somebody about this the other day. It's that climate change is often about energy, and it just so happens that if you put more energy into something, it's generally more expensive.
Yep.
And so, I mean, how lucky are we that things are kind of pushing us economically in the right direction, at least a little bit? We'd be
Right,
totally
and-
screwed if not,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And yeah, that's often the thing that creates change is the
Economic incentives
factors.
rather than the
And there's a
the
lot to be
moral ones.
gloomy about, but
Yeah.
and I have my list of all the things I'm gloomy about, but then there's also a list of stuff that I have I'm positive about.
Yeah.
And lab meat
Positive,
is
right?
for me is like it's just something that's interesting,
Yeah.
and I just feel like as
What-
a species, like
Yeah.
the whole climate change thing
Uh-huh.
is I'm more interested, instead of focusing on the doom and gloom,
Right.
but more interested on the solution. Like,
Right.
if we could find a solution to overpopulation,
Right.
that goal seems positive.
Jason's
to me.
saying plague.
Or
no.
just do what Thanos did.
Oh gosh.
Have people
Well, some people do that thought experiment. If somebody could snap their fingers and there was no suffering,
Right.
the lights just turn off. I wouldn't even know if I were the one. Right?
What are you
might be
talking about?
ethical.
Like self extinction?
Well, I mean, like you just if tomorrow, right? Because like as you live, you suffer. I mean, Jordan Peterson sort of says this. It's like
Sure.
it's not hard to find chaos, right?
Right.
Just being alive.
Yeah.
But once you're
And
alive,
you can eliminate
but-
suffering.
right,
And
but
in
once-
fact, if there was no suffering, you'd probably be really bored.
Right. And the thing is, but once you are alive,
Being
your
bored
interest is in staying alive. So it's a different conversation once you're alive and once you're not alive. But imagine a thought experiment in the where you have the whole universe and just the lights turn off with a click.
Uh-huh.
Nobody went through pain.
Right.
Suffering is zero.
Right.
But what's
Is the
considered
world is the world worse off? And there's no people that have a value structure anymore.
Right. Exactly.
Like it's
Yeah.
totally.
Yeah.
It's one of those things that kind of trips your mind up a little
Yeah.
bit.
Well, it's void.
Yeah, it's
Right?
void, and so you can't
And
even
it's
empty,
understand.
meaningless,
It might be a pointless question
It kind of is because there's
because I'm here
it's
trying
not-
to.
it's not
pontificate.
realistic.
Yeah,
I mean, well,
but if you're gone, there's nothing to
part of the human
pontificate.
condition. Yeah, suffering. There's always going to be suffering.
Yeah, you can't get rid of suffering. All we could do is minimize the extra suffering.
Okay,
Yeah.
I was gonna go another one. All right, so I had a question.
Like I suffer if they're not getting enough money.
Well, yeah. but
Yeah.
I mean, but you're rich by world and history standards.
Yeah, you're part of the 1%.
Yeah, you live better than Andrew Carnegie.
Sure. I thought you meant you for a second.
No, not me. Well, I mean, like if you really
Well,
think about it, the people who with modern healthcare and shoes on their feet and clean water to drink, I mean, we really, by world standards and the history of our species and timeline,
Yep.
anybody who has had a root canal would be dead in most of human history.
Sure. Yeah.
Right?
Oh yeah.
And so, like, that was the thing with, like, Tirvana Boy, the famous...
It really sucked in the
pre-
past.
yeah.
Man. Oh my god, it's
Yeah.
just a nightmare.
And so
So yeah, we are in the 1%. Like everybody in this room
Yeah.
is in the like just
When you think of the whole scope of human history.
well, I think that's a little bit different. Like let's just talk about the world right
Just
now.
right now as
the
it is.
people living right now.
Yeah.
We're in the 1%.
Yeah.
And then if you compare it to everybody that's ever lived, then we're probably in the 0.001%.
Yeah. It's a little mind blowing. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, anyone that's lived in the past, yeah, they had it rough because there was no technology. There was no. I mean, yeah, we have it easy now. I could just pull up my GPS and I know where the hell I'm going.
Yeah.
Back then, everyone had to figure it out on their
They had to
own.
do MapQuest. That was awful.
No.
Actually, that speaks to you, Jeff, a little
Actually,
bit.
when was the last time you heard MapQuest?
Just now. Before that, you mean?
No, I mean, it was still
get
the
it.
GPS. I'm just
Yeah.
saying before then, it was just actual physical maps.
Yeah, now I only hear about it.
Yeah.
Now I only
Which
hear
I
about
still
it.
enjoy myself.
Yeah.
And in fact, when I go on a long trip, I draw a map.
Well,
I'm like the last
that's kinda cool,
guy
yeah.
on the earth to do that.
Well, last time I went to Mexico City, I had to come back by myself, and I smashed my phone screen, so I had no.
Why'd you smash your phone
I
screen?
didn't do it on purpose, Jason. And so I had no GPS to go off of.
Right. Yeah.
And so I had to memorize a map, and it worked. I
Right.
guess.
Was it in Spanish?
Yep.
It was in Spanish. Yeah.
Yeah.
Of course.
So with One Child, One Nation, as I watched the documentary, it reminded me a lot of the whole climate change debate. And
Sure. That's really interesting take on it.
And
yeah.
so, well, I had another question. So you guys can tell me what you think. So my question that I was thinking of too was, let's say could something be marginally worse for the climate, but ethically good? Like that, those two things don't necessarily perfectly correlate, right?
Right.
So what if, you asked me, is lab grown meat better environmentally? What if it was very close, but slightly worse?
Then you would be reducing
But
suffering of animals, but maybe making climate change worse.
minimal climate change. Yeah.
And so
climate
you'd
change.
have to balance those two
Yeah,
things.
yeah.
And
And so,
I
I mean,
I would be on the side of the animals. I'm going to just straight out say it.
Me too.
Yeah.
And I think of that sometimes when I think about immigration arguments too. Like that sometimes maybe there's an increased usage. Like if everybody has a smartphone, if everybody's living in an industrialized place, well, then would we see greater climate change? We might for a short period, and then people have fewer kids. So it's hard to say.
Yeah. So that I think that this all ties into these people not wanting to have kids is that what I see through history is that the more people there are, the better things become. And I think this was a flaw with the one-child policy was that they thought that they would get instant starvation. But what I see is that you have more people
Producing.
You'd have more people farming, more people growing animals, more people doing whatever for food production. Food production would become more efficient because you'd have to produce more on smaller amounts of land, and it would just create innovation.
Yeah.
Because the 60s, when they implemented this policy, I think it was in the 60s or
No, it was
70s.
the 80s. It was only 30 years.
Or 80s.
Yeah.
We weren't at peak efficiency in any stretch.
Yeah.
There was so much room for improvement. So I think they were completely wrong on that.
It's hard because you can't run the counterfactual, right? You can't go back in time and see how it would be different.
Right.
And
Well, you could compare it to other countries that didn't have a one-child policy, and they're, in fact,
the birth rate
things
slowed
got
down. Yeah.
things got better, and people had fewer kids, and that's why I think that the climate change is important too. But I also think that early childhood nutrition is important as well, because more people will get past childhood. There'll be more people, population will increase.
And you get that one random person who goes way above beyond their
Exactly.
human
There's more
production.
people to
Yeah.
think about these problems and find solutions. And once things get better, people have less kids. And I'm not a mathematician, but I've heard people say that
Well, U.S. is declining in terms of its
all
population.
the rich countries, their population is going down.
Yeah, and we
That's
have to
good,
we have to use it is good because then we have to use immigration to balance out, and as people immigrate to richer countries, their livelihoods drastically improve.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what do you think of immigration? Like, what do you think the ideal immigration rate for the United
Oh,
States is?
I have no clue.
Okay. Do you think people have a right to say
I'm
we
sens-
have too many immigrants coming in?
That's a really difficult question.
Do you think there's
I
any
think that
validity
a-
to that statement?
Well, I
or-
think that a lot of times when people feel that sentiment, it's usually based on something that's not factually correct. I think it's often based on misperceptions, and I think that generally speaking, people are wrong, and or they say it, but it might be like a gut level reaction, but they don't mean it. And
Right.
Bryan Caplan has a lot of work on this. He talks about open borders, and he's not saying no borders. He's just saying open borders. People who are not criminals are free to work and live anywhere they want. He doesn't even talk about citizenship, and he runs the experiment as an economist, and he says that it's the single thing keep holding us back as far as innovation. Like if you want more people to innovate, well, they're not going to innovate in rural areas where they don't have access to education, they don't have access to good nutrition as children, they don't have. They're going to innovate in large cities, and then there's economies of scale. There's this thing of the tiny homes popping up, but they're way less efficient than if you just put people in really close communities. You don't need as many stores, you don't need as many gas stations. Like economies of scale reduce climate change too.
Yep.
So I think that I'm more on the open borders side of things. Obviously, I think people should have voting power, right? I do worry. 'Cause you mentioned at the beginning that Obama had just been elected. That year, we also voted to take away. Well, I didn't vote, but California voted to take away the rights of same-sex couples to marry. And so I do worry about changing the value systems too quickly.
Right.
And that is a concern that like Gad Sad has brought up. But the second generation, usually their values are perfectly in line with ours.
That's been my experience as well.
Yeah. So I find that.
Although I hear it's not true across the board.
Oh, I
Like
don't know.
from what I've seen with my own eyes.
Okay.
And I've always grown up in being like the minority amongst minority communities. That's always where I've lived.
Right.
And that's what I've noticed. The second generation is just like the people that they grow, like the people that are in the country.
Yeah, and they discard the stuff that they don't like that don't work, that restrict freedoms, and they keep all the things that are great: the food, the culture, the music, all the things that you want. Right?
Yeah.
The beauty, the art, all that stuff stays.
And that's what I've seen with my own eyes, and I don't want to just say that that's true. But I've lived in several cities in a couple different countries where that's what I've seen with all sorts of different groups of immigrants.
Yeah. So
the only time I've heard, and I haven't seen this with my own eyes, and I have no idea if it's true or not, is countries that take in massive Muslim populations, and that they, because of religious reasons, don't
you're talking about
integrate.
You're talking about really small countries. And they have very different language and value systems.
Yeah.
And then, but the other thing is too, is like you have to wait and see what does the second generation look like.
Right. Yeah. And in those countries, their second generation apparently still has the problems of the first generation.
Yeah.
And I haven't looked into it much, but this is just what I've heard. Like, like I'm saying, it's all peace, love, and granola, and everything seems to work.
So I'm saying,
but I have heard, and actually, you mentioned Gad Sad. I think he said
some of the
same
and
thing.
I think he's.
Do you think he's wrong on that?
Yeah, I think he's wrong. I think he's right in the short term, but wrong in the long term. And so it's kind of I'm looking at it from a long. I'm measuring in a longer term scale, and I think that on the large scale he's going to be wrong.
Right. It's also hard to find information about that.
So Bryan Caplan has I think he has a book on this. He's made some really good arguments, and I've watched some of his talks with Dave Rubin and Julia Galef on this topic.
Right.
Another guy, though, and this is really important, so I often think that the left is right but for the wrong reasons, by the name of George Borjas. has looked at how economically we benefit from immigration, right?
Yeah.
But he looks at it, and the reality is not everybody benefits equally. And so
Probably true for
it-
everything in
yeah,
life.
yeah, and so
But yeah, there are
the largest
yeah.
benefits go to the immigrants,
Okay.
and the largest benefits go to the people at the top. And so that supports, I
Okay.
think, progressive taxing, raising minimum wages,
yeah.
or using some sort of tax incentive where maybe you don't raise wages, but
Yeah.
you.
I wonder
give
if that's how true that is, because I sometimes see something different with my own eyes. Is that, you take California for example, with the large Central American immigrants, and when you drive like through the Central Valley and all the farmland and stuff like that, there's a lot of immigrants are doing those jobs. And I had a job picking blueberries when I was young, and I fucking hated it.
Oh, really?
It was I did not like doing it. But people are doing those jobs for pretty low wages.
But their wages are better than had they stayed in their home.
Exactly. Yeah,
And
I'm
so
not disagreeing with
this
that.
is-
But what I'm saying is that I don't think the benefits just benefit the immigrant and the people at the top. I think that what that does is that directly correlates to what you see in the grocery store.
Yeah, being less expensive.
and the prices.
Yeah.
Because these days you go in the grocery store and you get any food you could imagine, and it's reasonably priced. And we got to give credit where credit is due. Is that a lot of people are doing those jobs, are doing it for pretty damn cheap.
Yeah.
And it's also a lot of immigrants are doing those jobs.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to work
Yeah.
in a slaughterhouse or in a field.
Yeah,
I'm just not.
sure.
I often think immigrants are better than me because
Yeah.
they could do those jobs where
Well,
I would hate it.
That's
I
the
would.
thing that makes me uncomfortable, because I don't think that the pro-immigration argument should be have
I
more
don't think
immigrants
that's a fair argument either.
Yeah.
But it is. It is. I'm just
so they can do things we don't want to do.
Exactly.
Yeah,
I
that
don't think
doesn't
that's fair.
feel
But I
ethical
think
to
that
me
that's
either.
what's going on,
Yeah.
and I think that also feeds probably
but that-
factories in
yeah.
the third world where we're getting all our cheap crap from.
So Kaplan does go over that, and he says that the amount that you would pay more for an apple is infinitesimal. That's according
Okay,
to Kaplan.
sure.
But I
Yeah,
haven't
yeah.
read his book yet to really weigh it.
Right.
Borjas and Kaplan actually disagree. This guy, George Borjas, who's pointed out that that it doesn't get dispersed evenly, the advantages. That would mean that we also have to look at helping out those that are displaced. He looks at how immigration impacts specifically poorer African Americans, and also how it affects.
Do you want to go into that a bit? Because I've heard that argument too. Are you saying that?
It drives a little bit of an increase, marginal
Right.
increase in incarceration too, because employment rates also affect whether or not people do crime.
Right.
And so it all ties together. And so something can have like and here I'm pro-immigration. So
Yeah.
something can have a negative impact, but could be the ethical
Sure.
argument.
I wonder
Right.
that in the software industry is because software companies hire a lot of immigrants.
Yeah. Oh, I did one. That was actually on my
From
thing.
Canada,
Yeah.
Russia, China, India.
Yeah.
So those are the four places.
And possibly
And-
drive down wages for people who
Drive
got
down
promised.
Wages
Six-figure
of
salaries.
Americans that are doing
Yeah.
that could be doing the same job.
Yeah.
And also, you're talking about how this affects African Americans is that there's a lot of unemployment in that community, and instead of training them to work in the technology sector, they're remaining unemployed, and then they're bringing in people like myself. I'm guilty, right?
Yeah.
Well, no, I'm not guilty. I'm not going to say that. But they're hiring people from all over the world to come and work
Yeah.
in technology, but there's so much unemployment here.
Yeah. And so, like, what if we invested in the people who are already here? But the thing
Yeah.
is the benefit for those people from the other countries is enormous, right?
It is enormous. Sure.
So this
Yep.
is called Simpson's paradox. There's actually a term for it.
Yep.
And so if you have somebody from a poorer country who would have made a little bit more money in the poorer country, leaves the poorer country, now that country's income has dropped. and they
Right.
come to the U.S.
And
where they work
sometimes
for
it's the best people
exactly
that leave.
Yeah, exactly. And so they come to the U.S. and now they've driven down wages a little bit for the U.S.
Right. Yeah.
The average benefit
so
to the world is
complicated,
the
man.
average
It's like,
benefit to the
yeah.
world is huge,
Right,
but
yeah,
it's
yeah,
driven
yeah.
down the wages of both countries. Now, here's the other thing that gets me a little that why what we need to do, because there's also a cultural factor. So, like with the One Child One Nation, it wasn't the right culture to implement that policy, and so I'm worried that Kaplan's arguments, even though they're for immigration,
Yeah.
are in the wrong culture. Because another problem that I see on my side of the aisle is that we tend to look at disparities and say because there's disparities, there's mistreatment.
Right.
And so it's not surprising to me that, let's say, somebody immigrates when they're 30, that they would have less money than a comparable person who started their education here when they were 18, their formal education.
Right.
And so if you were to compare their incomes, they would be different.
Yeah.
And that would be a sign of our progress, not of our bigotry.
Right.
But we tend to assume that because we see a disparity, it's caused by only one thing.
Right.
And so,
Piss break.
okay, break. So I think we're recording again. Jason had to go to work, so unfortunately he had to leave us.
Cool.
Yeah. So
What were we talking about? I can't remember now.
I know, right? I left off saying like I feel like the culture right now that we're in, when we're struggling with equity and our history of racial inequality that still persists today, even through massive attempts to try to curb racial inequality.
Right.
I was worried that we're not going to look at some things that might be signs of improvement, and we'll instead attribute it to something negative.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So
Right.
instead of comparing anything that's in the African American community that's gotten better,
Not just
instead
African
of
American.
comparing it to the past, you're comparing it to other groups.
Yeah, and so when we
which
try
could
to do
make
the
it-
group
you could
thing,
always make everything look negative in that when you make that
almost
type of
depending on how you draw
comparison.
the lines of
Right,
what you're
yeah.
studying, and so
Because you could find a lot of positive everywhere across the board for almost everybody.
exactly. And I'm worried about that at the college. We tend to look at equity gaps, and if we're doing a good job of trying to give more access to people who otherwise wouldn't have access to education,
Right.
you would actually potentially see equity gaps. You would expect
Yes.
them to rise.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
if they're
I don't think it's a good thing to measure.
no, but if they're going down, well, I think you want to be aware of it at least.
Yes. Yeah.
I don't
they
think
could
it
be
hurts,
interpreted
but you can
wrong.
interpret it vastly incorrectly.
Yeah.
And
Because you could close equity gaps by making things worse for everybody.
exactly. And in fact, I've seen people, I mentioned that in the first podcast.
Okay.
With, episode 0, which is unlinked, but you know what? I'll link to it. So if people want to find episode 0, they
Okay.
can. I mentioned that with Jason, that I've seen people entertain those ideas. Fortunately, I don't think they're being, I think there's enough smart people who push back on these
Right.
things,
Yeah.
but they'll say, oh, this program's benefiting, any intervention is going to benefit both groups or all
Yeah.
groups.
Yeah.
And it's benefiting this other group disproportionate to how it's benefiting the group I really was interested in helping.
Right.
But the problem is that you've definitely benefited that group, and the benefits at the bottom are perceived much higher. So the group that's struggling, a little bit of benefit goes much further than a group that's doing well.
Yes. Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I'm worried that we don't always have the perspective to
Right.
to look at that from a cultural standpoint, even though I'm very moved by Kaplan's argument
Right.
for immigration. I just don't know if we'll implement it well, or if we'll do it well, if we'll get pushback
Right.
from my own side. So my question to you, having come from Canada and working for a software company, was that in a way, what would happen if you decided you didn't want to work for that company? Would you lose your visa?
Yes, there's various stages, right? During the H-1B visa stage, you're only allowed to work. That's it for that one company. But then once you get your green card, then you could switch jobs. And now I got my citizenship, so I could do anything.
So you quick, this is just yes or no. Did
What?
you vote for Hillary?
I was
No.
not.
I was trying to.
Oh,
prove
you tricked me. Technically, no, because I wasn't a citizen.
Right. I was trying to make you sound like
Oh,
you support
yeah.
Trump. No, right.
You're trying to get me in trouble, man.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite candidate?
Tulsi Gabbard.
Oh yeah, that's right. Okay.
Yeah. She's the only one that doesn't like repulse me. I don't like any of them. I don't like.
I'm gonna.
And it goes across the board. Like,
Yeah.
I don't like the Republicans. I don't like the Libertarians. I don't like the Green Party.
Yeah.
I don't like most of the Democrats.
Right.
But I'm really ignorant, man.
Me-
Because
well,
I haven't been studying the issues.
Me too.
And a lot of
Sometimes
stuff,
I
it's just like
sometimes I don't.
personality-wise, gut feelings, or stuff that like I like. So one of the things I like about Bernie, just on the surface, is that I like his personality.
Yeah.
And
Right. There's a genuineness there.
same with Tulsi Gabbard, who's my favorite out of all of them.
Mm-hmm.
And also a thing that I like that Tulsi Gabbard and Bernie Sanders has done is that they've both gone on long form interviews with Joe Rogan, where they just talk for
Yeah, I do like that.
an
And Yang,
hour,
Andrew
2
Yang
hours,
too.
or
I like
whatever.
Andrew Yang. He's one of
Andrew
my other
Yang's
people.
done
And
it as well.
I should add this in. When you say you're ignorant, your epistemic humility is such that you would say you're ignorant, even though you know quite a bit more than average.
I don't know. I'm not.
I mean,
sure.
can't we say we could say that you probably know more than your average Joe on the street?
Well, some average Joes are really smart.
Some average, but I mean
like-
that I do mean the average.
I'm talking.
I'm not talking about
Well, what's
your,
the average job
I'm
that
not-
the average Joe has? Is a truck driver. And truck drivers,
they
all
listen.
they do is
They
listen to
listen, yeah.
podcasts.
All
So
right,
they
yeah.
are the smartest people around these days.
Some of them, yeah, man.
Yeah.
I get just.
But what I mean
got a
is
good
I
friend.
haven't looked at all the issues and seen where they all stand and compared them. I think a lot of the Democratic candidates are probably pretty similar.
Yeah, could you say that? Here's something I think about a lot is that there are things that I think of preference falsification. There are things that people have to say to be elected, and things that they can't say. But deep down, I have a respect for their intelligence and their character.
Mm-hmm.
So, would you say that there are sometimes areas where you're uncomfortable, you're okay with, you're comfortable with voting for somebody who might publicly speak on something, but deep down they're going to handle it like a mature adult?
I hope so, because I have a feeling I'm going to have to do that when I vote Democrat.
Yeah, me too. I
this
plan to vote
election.
Democrat, and I'd be happy to vote for Sanders or Warren. I've criticized Sanders a lot,
There's a lot to criticize.
but I do think he's a genuine person, and I
mean, I think a lot of his economic policies are
Yeah.
are just so far off in left field,
Mhm.
and that
was
if he does get elected, actually, that's probably true for any Democrat. Is they're probably not going to be able to implement.
Well, I think you can make a
7/8 of the stuff that they're talking
Well, I think you
about
can
now.
make a conservative case for some of their economic policies. I almost want to make a video, the conservative case for why some of the progressives are right. Because I think a lot of the progressives
I
are
see.
right.
Sure, yeah.
Are right, but for the wrong reasons. And so people,
Exactly.
I'll just give you one.
Yeah.
This is one that I'm not an expert on, but when it comes to wealth distribution, you can't solve. It's not easy to solve social problems just by throwing money at them. This is something
Exactly.
conservatives are right about.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
If you give money to somebody who
You could make it worse.
you could kill them, even.
The alcoholic analogy or the drug addict analogy
Yeah.
is a
Yeah,
good
yeah,
one. Where
yeah.
The only time those people do okay is when they don't have money
Yeah.
because they can't go and blow
Right.
it all.
Well,
on-
I had a friend just 2 years ago die from something like that, from trying to get clean from something similar, but the reverse, trying to get clean too quickly.
Sure, yeah.
But throwing money at them is not always the best way, and it doesn't always work. And so things like healthcare, things like social safety net, are better forms of wealth redistribution.
Oh, okay, yeah. I do agree with. I 100% agree with that. Yeah.
And
I think that's one of the indefensible things right now is the cost of healthcare. Like it's just too damn expensive for most
Absolutely.
people, and
Yeah.
it should be easier. And I know, Americans seem to like the idea of paying for it themselves, as opposed to being taxed really heavily. And that, that is something that I've noticed from
It's a perception
from
of freedom
Canada
of choice
versus
right?
America, is that a lot of Americans don't like the idea of anybody having a free ride without having worked for it.
Yeah,
They
it's a
seem to
cultural
be
difference,
really
right?
against that. And who am I to say anything
Yeah.
against that? There is elements of truth to that statement. And we don't have to be like Scandinavia.
Yeah.
There's going to be an American flavor
Yeah.
on it.
The thing is though, I think if more Americans got to see, or people who have that sentiment got to live with the people who are getting the free rides, quote unquote,
Right. Yeah.
who are on food stamps, who are
Yep.
living in mobile homes with holes in their
Yep.
floors. I spent quite a bit of time with somebody like that,
Right.
where you had to watch where you stepped.
Yeah.
You realize that
Yeah.
this is not, you don't want to trade places with
It's
that person.
not
But
quite a free ride.
right,
Yeah.
yeah. But I do think conservatives are right that you want to align incentive structures so that people can get out of that too,
Sure.
because incentive structures might not be set up ideally in the best way too. Yeah.
Right.
And now I'm just speaking kind of from my experience, but
Yeah.
I think that's it. If people traded places, well, not even traded places, just live with somebody for a week
Right.
and follow them
Yeah,
around,
yeah.
and you get a different perspective.
I think you'd get all sorts of different perspectives, and here's the opposite perspective. So I agree with everything you said there, where you would probably get some more, I don't know, empathy for people that were worse off than you. But here's the 100% or 180 degree different view of that is being around people that are really poor and really rich. You kind of see how inequality is different these days. And this
Yeah.
might be really controversial. What
No,
I'm
go
gonna
ahead.
say,
Yeah,
but
go ahead.
People might disagree with this.
Right. It's okay.
But there's inequality in terms of your income, but then there's also an inequality in terms of your material comforts and your material wants and needs. And I would argue that today there's less of that.
Less,
And
so less inequality of what you need.
material needs.
Okay.
So if you compare, like I've spent a lot of time in homes of people that are very poor, and I've also spent a lot of times in the homes of people that are mega ultra rich.
Right. Yeah.
You know why?
Me too, yeah.
Musician.
Musician.
Right?
Yeah.
It's the poor people
Are the musicians. Yeah.
and the rich people
Well, you're
are
in
the
the home
people that
of
hire
a
you.
musician, like,
And if you
Yeah.
compare, and I want you to, I don't know if this is a good idea or not. So push back on this one. I don't know if this is true.
I might push back, but
Yeah,
I think,
good. Because I'm just thinking, I'm just talking out of my ass here.
Well,
but
here's
what
the
I'm
thing.
getting at here is that when a poor person's house is very similar to a rich person's house. They all have
Today, yeah.
They have a microwave and a fridge and a computer and a cell phone and a gaming system and a giant flat screen TV and a car in the driveway.
Right.
So the rich person's house is
similar.
often just bigger.
Yeah.
Giant ceilings. You know, the poor person's house will have a 50-inch flat screen, and the rich person's house will have I don't know what the size they go up to these days, but they might have several of them.
They might have several of them that aren't even hooked up.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I know.
So there's if you look at inequality
Yeah.
that way, you actually see less inequality. And I think that's a valid way of looking at things. I'm just saying it's one facet to a multivariate
that's consumer
problem.
stuff. So consumer stuff as far as price have dropped drastically. So the only reason I have that big screen, and Jason left, he helped me pick it out, was that it was so cheap.
Exactly.
Now,
and that's another aspect of inequality as well.
But
is
healthcare has not gone down.
Let's talk about one more thing about the inequality. Is that the only reason that all these things are cheaper is because of inequality. Because at one point, the flat screen TV cost
thousands,
$50,000, and only a rich person could afford it. A bunch of rich people bought it at the height
for a lot of money.
and then the price got dropped down
as people bought more and it
as
became
people
cheaper to
dropped
produce.
more, and
Yeah.
then they started mass producing them, and they became more efficient at making them. And so I just want to say that inequality is complex, and
Yeah.
sometimes inequality is actually decreasing. Does that? Here, I'm blabbing now.
No, I see
But
what you're
anyways,
saying.
you know what?
It
You know what I'm getting at.
inequality allows for people when it terms to things that actually matter. So if we just talk about dollars, yes, it's rising. But for things like experiencing movies, being able to go
Right.
and access books and materials and education,
Exactly.
buying a car, transportation, those sorts
Yeah.
of things.
And we are an
that are safer.
information
Yeah.
society, and I think that's the most valuable thing
Yeah.
to anybody these days is access to information, whether it's just movies or music or books or whatever. We all have that. There's equality actually in that.
But you will notice that some things don't scale in quite the same way.
Yeah.
And that has not happened for healthcare.
And and that's why I think looking at healthcare is important right now.
Yeah.
And that we got to figure out a way to get the price down and make it more accessible for everybody, but that works at the whole, that makes a lot of people happy across the whole country. And we got to be careful of unintended consequences. So I don't know anything about this, but one thing that I would worry about is that if you implemented universal health care, what would the unintended consequences be? So a lot of other countries that have universal health care, I don't know if I'm right, so push back on this if I'm talking bullshit.
We'll see.
Is that maybe they're piggybacking on American innovation and technology and
I have argued that myself. Yeah.
pharmaceuticals, and that if you implemented universal health care in our country, would it decrease innovation, and would it make it worse for other countries that are depending on American innovation? Do you think that's
I think that's reasonable.
that's something to be worried about?
Yeah,
I don't know
absolutely.
if it is or
because
not. I don't know.
and that's actually probably already a problem. So there are some things that are not profitable that we need.
Yeah.
So people are looking at the creation of antibiotic resistant new antibiotics, right?
Yeah.
To fight antibiotic resistance. It's not really profitable to look, 50, 60 years ahead in the future. Because some people want to buy a company and then trade in 5 years, right?
Yeah.
And what's another example that's like that? I heard that was true with vaccines too. Like there's not a lot of companies making vaccines because there just isn't a lot of profit to it.
Right.
And so there's got to be other ways to structure things, other sort of ways of
Well, you could file a lot of that stuff under it's just better for the
humanity.
country.
Yeah. And so the sad thing is, but there's no incentive for it. And so when it's purely, this is the anti-free market thing, right? The free market is not going to solve these problems,
Yes. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so you were saying that is legitimately a problem. And I've actually mentioned that as a problem. And I don't know how you solve it. It could be that way. What I've heard is some potential counter arguments, but I don't know enough about it, is that many of these innovations happen through organizations like schools and universities,
Right.
and that those wouldn't necessarily go away just because we offer some form of universal health care or expand Medicaid, that those would still exist and we'd still see profit we still see profit.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
But yeah, I mean, talking about one child nation is really fascinating because it brings up all sorts of other ideas. For example,
Well, it didn't work out economically for them, right? That to me was
didn't-
interesting.
Yeah, because
So-
it shows you first off that central planning doesn't work, right? Like you try and make some policy and it just f's everything up. And
Because they in our current system set up this way where we sort of are looking for exponential growth, and it can't.
yeah, that's
Right.
that's unfeasible as well,
Right.
Right,
And
because
so-
it can't just get bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
It just doesn't
And
make
when
sense.
and so I think this relates perfectly to the healthcare thing. And this is one of the reasons why I liked Andrew Yang as a candidate. Is even though I don't know if he's going to do, if I agree with everything he says and everything he wants to do,
Mm-hmm.
he's being very creative about addressing what we tax in our incentive structures and how we value the work and labor and actions of people
Right.
and society. And when it comes, like we were saying about healthcare, is how do we subsidize or how do we value innovation? How do we
Right.
value that and how do we promote
Yep.
that?
Mm-hmm.
It's not being dealt with in our current system at all.
Right.
Well, I wouldn't say
Well,
at
to
all,
an
but
extent.
it's
But there is
not
innovation.
perfectly
I mean,
aligned.
there's
but not
a
perfectly
shitload
aligned
of
with things that
innovation
we
right
care
now,
about, right?
for lots of things. You know, I think Elon Musk is a good example of
Oh, yeah.
innovation, right?
Are you
Because
going to buy his truck?
I'd love to.
Yeah.
But he's innovating the hell out of everything he touches, and there's lots of people that are thriving in this environment, and so you can't just say that that's nothing. I mean, that's something.
Yeah, it
And,
certainly is.
You know, and if you create some other system to help to supposedly innovate, could have the opposite effects. It may innovate some things and like completely f up other things.
yeah,
So-
that's what we're worried about is like
Exactly,
the
it's-
worst things.
because
not
that's the iron law of unintended consequences. And you look at all the bad things that have happened in the past.
Mhm.
Often it's by really smart people trying to make things better.
right.
So
Yeah.
that's why I like slow growth.
Well, that's-
Things moving slowly.
That's the conservative argument.
And
yeah.
one child nation is
drastic.
drastic,
Yeah.
and it screwed up so many things. And another way of looking at one child nation is it showed that in communism you elevate the party to be the highest thing in the society. It's more
The
important than
group.
your family.
hmm
And you could see the disastrous consequences that people would that is supposed to be the most important thing to any human is their child, and they would put the party
Right.
over the child, and they would
It's like these
abandon the child, kill the child.
extreme utilitarianism, right?
Yeah, but then you also saw this other thing at play in that all the people that were being interviewed that lived through the one child policy, people that gave up their children or people that were taking children away or giving late term abortions, they all said, what could I do? I was just following orders.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
was just following the government policy.
Mm-hmm.
How could I have done anything differently?
And
that shows you the absolute fallacy of communism and socialism as a system,
Mm-hmm.
is that it makes people do really bad things.
right.
Whereas I could never imagine any situation where I would voluntarily give up my child or have a late term abortion
Well,
just because it was supposedly.
you might.
I don't think,
Okay,
well, maybe if I
I'll-
grew up under there.
I
but-
had one student because I do a thought experiment with the utilitarianism, and I'll start with something like the Italian leather shoes one, like would you jump into a river or would you jump into a pool to save a drowning kid? And everybody
Right.
says yes, and then I'll maybe transfer over to the trolley thought experiment. I had one student one semester who said she would pull the lever so that 5 people live and 1 person dies, even if it was her own child, because she knew that if everybody acted that way, her child would most likely be on the 5. Because it's not always her at the lever.
Sure. Yeah.
And so there might be a number, or there might be a world or a point in which you would do some sort of utilitarian action that might
Maybe
benefit
I mean,
people
but
more than
these are-
yourself or your
yeah,
or
but
your
those
child.
those are really extreme.
And it's a thought
situations,
experiment.
right?
It's not
But
real.
sometimes it's not a thought experiment, and it you see that probably happened millions of times in China, and it reminds me of Sophie's Choice. Have you ever seen
Oh
that
no, I
movie?
don't think I have.
Oh, that's
What was it about? Because maybe I have and I just can't recall.
Okay,
it.
so it's well, the crucial scene is kind of similar to what you said. So this is, well, it doesn't matter. Everybody knows this. Well, I'm going to tell you the story anyways.
Okay, that's okay.
So it's this woman is in a Nazi concentration camp, and she's got a boy and a girl, a child.
Okay,
she's
yeah.
got a son and a daughter, and she is waiting on the train platform. She just got to the concentration camp, and she goes up to one of the guards and is like, "This is a mistake. I'm not Jewish," and the guard just completely fucks with her. Like he pretends to be compassionate for a bit, but he's just playing her.
Okay.
And in the end, she shouldn't have said anything, because what he gets her to do is to kind of torture her psychologically, just for the fun of it. He says, "You got to pick one of your children,
Oh, gosh.
and I'm going to take the other one and throw them in the ovens. Or if you don't, I'm going to take both of them."
Oh, gosh.
And so it's like what you're saying. Sometimes you have to make that choice, but it's in an extreme,
Yeah.
it's an extreme
Yeah.
situation, but it does happen.
Uh-huh.
And guess what? She picks one of them. It just comes.
Do you remember? Do you recall which one she picked?
She said, "I'm going to keep my older son, and you take the younger daughter."
That's interesting.
It's a brutal movie, man.
Do you think
oh my
there's
god,
an-
it's like one of the
Yeah.
worst.
Do you think there's an evolutionary reason why people pick sons over daughters? Because sons, there's less cost per child to pass on genes.
Maybe like when you're forced to make that choice, maybe there is something way back in your.
Or maybe you're
in your-
thinking the existence of a daughter alone in a world like when you think about the effects of rape.
That's crazy,
that
man. I
it's-
never thought
That
of
it's
that.
that it's you're thinking my son, even in a bad situation, will suffer less psychologically.
Okay, yeah, and that's why I loved One Child Nation, because all these things come up.
Yeah.
Because that there was an aspect of that in that documentary as well, in that people overwhelmingly chose the son.
Yeah, and it could
And I thought about it completely differently, but maybe you're right.
like you're just
I
thinking,
thought,
what is a woman gonna suffer like in this situation, right?
yeah, and I thought it was because their society is similar to the one that we're living in, where the male gets the name, and so the male carries on.
I do think that was a huge element
name.
for sure.
But
Could be both. Both could be true.
Yeah.
potentially, yeah.
wow, because man, it's like you do not know what you would do in that situation,
Right.
because in our safe, easy society where everything's usually works out pretty good, you do not know those parts of your brain that are triggered when those types of situations and those types of decisions have to be made, like these life or death situations. So, I mean, yeah. That's a really interesting way of looking at it. But go watch that movie.
No, I watched the One Child. I haven't. Watched,
I mean,
watched
Sophie's Choice. I know
Yeah,
you watched
now-
One
that'll
Child,
probably
but
be the next
Sophie's
one,
Choice
yeah.
is a really good movie too. Yeah, and it all hinges on that one scene,
Yeah,
because most of the movie is just about
leading up to it, or
no, it's after.
oh,
And so you're kind of wondering, like, why is this lady the way she is? And it's because she's got this dark secret.
wow.
So,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's like, do you think we live in a patriarchy?
I think it's too simplistic to just say. Like, I'm
Yeah.
always multi-causal linked
Me too.
to things.
Yeah. And the thing that I do think about, that is patriarchal about our society. And first off, I hate that term because it's been like totally
Abused.
abused.
Yeah, like the best version. I don't think people understand patriarchy. Most of the people.
I do.
Like,
But I think the part that is patriarchal and that came across in One Child Nation
exactly. Yeah.
was that the boy gets the name. So that's where the lineage is.
Right.
And then the other thing that's patriarchal is that even though we don't consider ourselves to be a religious culture, we kind of, there still is a dominant religion, and our society was more religious not too long ago.
Right.
You don't have to go back too many decades.
Man, I've experienced that going and
Yeah.
visiting people's churches all the time. Yeah.
And the
So
and the
that's-
the religion is patriarchal as well. But
Absolutely.
there's a good aspect, and then
Right,
there's
right.
a bad aspect, and the
I
good
don't see,
aspect.
I don't see much. Okay, I was going to ask you.
Okay,
Like, I
so
don't
the
see
good
much
part is that you do God is often portrayed as a man, and it's like, well, why is that? And I think it's because, well, I shouldn't say. This is all from
Jordan Peterson. Yeah, I was going to say it sounds like Jordan
so
Peterson.
I would
Yeah.
know nothing about
Yeah.
this if it wasn't for him. Is that the idea of God is a judgmental father, and why is there a judgmental father? It's because in your life you have to forego immediate gratification in order to plan for the future, and that goes back to hunter-gatherer days because you had to.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
You had to plan,
True.
you couldn't eat those seeds, man. You had to save some to plant
But
for the future. and
why
you had
would
to
that
work.
be? Because
And I think that
why would
just
that be
got-
masculine?
I think it just got wrapped in a masculine personality.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's
Because some of the gods, there are plenty of gods that are feminine too.
Yep.
And but that's where they split them up. I think a lot of people don't know this is there are different names for the different gods. So there was that are popular for Christianity,
Right.
and Yahweh more specifically
Yep.
is the god of war, and I think that's why it's masculine.
right.
And so, who fought wars? Back in the day was more of the male aspect back in hunter-gatherer society.
Wow, that meant
And so,
God of War. I didn't know that.
there were three. There was Elohim, El Shaddai, and Yahweh.
Mm-hmm.
And slowly, as the religion grew, and it turned into monotheism.
Right. Yeah.
And it's sort of weird because there are contradictions in the Bible where Yahweh gets in a fight with another god called Chemosh and actually loses to Chemosh. And I've never understood that section. I want to ask people who really believe and how they
okay.
interpret
Yeah.
that section.
I don't even know.
Because it's
I've never even heard of that.
yeah. And
So how does that play out in the Bible? Do you remember the?
I remember the story vaguely because I'm not. I'll be honest, I'm not that into it.
And you remember when we started off talking, we were talking about how it's good to have all sorts of
Views,
friends
yeah,
from
friends,
all different. I
Because
have
you hear
some
about these things randomly, yeah.
Yeah, I have some friends. I have a friend who's a preacher, and it's so good to be able to
I
be
know,
like,
right.
"Hey, man, what does this mean? What's your interpretation of that?"
Yeah.
and they're always like, "Oh, that means blah blah blah." And,
Right. Well, one of my favorite quotes from the Bible is, I think it's 1 Timothy 2:12, which is the one that women shouldn't speak. And I asked one of my older friends who's very, very religious, and she had a very interesting way of looking at it
Right.
to apologize for it and say, "Oh,
Yeah,
I didn't really
yeah.
mean this." So it can be good to get different perspectives.
Right. Yeah.
And my favorite isn't because I think that line is good. It's because I actually heard somebody say it in a church telling women they shouldn't speak.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, but anyways, Chemosh, there were these groups of people. There were two groups of people, one with Yahweh, one with the other group, or the other group, and they sacrificed a child, I believe, and that scared away the people that were supposed to attack. And so it was like a battle between Yahweh and Chemosh, and Yahweh retreats.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, it's like, well, why would that work if they knew it was fake?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe I'm getting the story a little oversimplifying it,
Right.
but there's some
So
people
was
who
that
look
the
at
point of it? Was that the lesson to be learned was that sometimes even God retreats? Is that
well,
because that's an interesting story?
That could be an interesting story,
because
too.
You think about like our history of war and all the bad things that have happened. Because when there's a war, you're supposed to fight to the last man and never give up, and that's like a very patriotic thing to do. But what about
I don't know
what
if that's
about
what it
people that
I don't
actually
know.
gave up? What if Japan in World War II, like halfway through, was like, we really effed this one up. We know the Americans are working on the atomic bomb, and we're just gonna bow out now, and maybe save a few 100,000 lives.
Yeah.
They would be looked at as cowards, right?
Uh-huh.
But then you could also look at it like
The massive,
they're heroes
yeah,
for
I
like
see.
for knowing when to give up.
Yeah.
Because you could give up and not have suffer any consequences.
But I don't think that for most of human existence, it was you don't suffer any consequences. It usually was that
You
the
did
women
suffer
the women were
consequences.
raped, you were
Yep.
killed, and
Mhm.
so it was
Yeah.
pretty awful.
But in World War II, I think Germany and Japan would have been they definitely would have been
Right.
better off if they surrendered early.
And so my larger point was that in those contexts, that's when, in a worse context like that, that's when war becomes so important. So I think that's why Yahweh became the, known as the monotheistic God.
Right,
It all sort of consolidated into him
Yeah.
because war was more important at the time. So there were different versions of God and different names.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
those, if you look at I guess people looked at older translations and found different names for God.
Right.
And that could be why it was masculine. Because I was asking, well, why is it masculine? Why would God? Because I could see the reverse being true. Like if everything's chaotic and, in fact, this is where I think there might be, maybe I don't understand Jordan Peterson's argument.
I don't think he's making an argument for that element of
masculine
personality
versus-
being. He's just noticing that that's how society has decided over thousands of years of storytelling
to make that figure masculine.
That's masculine, and then there's feminine as well.
Because generally,
feminine
when we
would
think
be-
about sexual selection, women are the ones that make the choice, right?
Exactly.
That's why we
Yep.
present the
Yep.
that's why people save 3 months of their salary to buy an expensive wedding ring.
Yep.
It's because women oftentimes are the ones that make the choice, right?
Yeah, and I think that's an argument against the popular modern interpretation of the patriarchy is that women have chosen mates that have those
Qualities.
right?
Yeah, I think it's oversimplified, and
totally
I really,
oversimplified.
if I could recommend a book that everybody read, I think I have it here somewhere. It's called A Moral Animal by Robert Wright. Really, really good book.
Yeah,
One of
yeah.
my favorite books I've read recently, which just kind of overviews how sexual selection plays a role in our evolution
Right.
and in our choices, in our morality,
Yeah.
in things like differential parental investment and all these subconscious things that go on that we're not aware of. That
So what do you think about in terms of sexual selection and inequality? Because there's a lot of inequality in how women choose their mates. Like they're choosing
yeah.
the top of the hierarchy. They're trying to get the best of the best.
There's a lot of truth to that. If you look at I really like online dating stuff because you can track interactions between millions of people. I've even said this, I think, on the other podcast.
Okay.
And there's OK Trends has some data to show that if you are over 24 and make less than $40,000, and when you think about it, the average household income in the U.S. is like $55,000. So if you make less than $40-some thousand, your chances of getting a date go way down
For a man.
for men.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Unaffected if you're
Right.
female. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I do think
Yep.
there's some.
And everybody knows that.
Yeah,
So-
exactly. Everybody knows it's three things.
Yeah.
Which is women tend to care about, like when you ask a young woman what she looks for in a mate, you don't say mate, but guy.
Sure.
She wants him to have a job
Mm-hmm.
and a car
Yep.
and taller than her.
Yep.
Those three things.
Yep.
And people, and actually one of the things that. This is a whole different conversation,
Yeah.
actually.
Well,
I'm gonna go in a
it's
different-
interesting because the whole argument about inequality gets thrown out the window in a lot of situations. Dating is one.
Yeah.
If you need brain surgery and you need to take a flight to get there,
You don't care.
you're gonna want the best pilot
And the best
and
surgeon.
the best
Yeah.
surgeon. And it's also in sports and music too. And I think sports and music are the two most important cultural aspects of any society. because you can't hide your talent, right? Or you can't fake your way to
You might.
I'm sorry, you can't fake your way to the top usually. You can a little bit,
You,
but
you used to be able to maybe more in sports, but now that
it's
advanced
hard in
analytics
sports, yeah.
are out,
Yeah.
the values have changed quite a bit.
But in sports and music, as a consumer, you totally believe in inequality because you go and watch the best sports teams. You just don't go to the park and watch whoever.
Music's different because the aim of music is different for different people.
Yep.
And so sports,
But you don't. If you want to go see
Sports is-
music, you go and see whoever's the top,
Okay.
the best singer.
no,
But you don't go to the local
don't.
bar.
You
Oh,
don't.
really? Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So here's the thing: is
But the people behind the top singer, even though the top singer might be fake,
yeah.
the whole structure of all the session musicians
Yeah.
that went into making that.
Oh
that
yeah.
song,
Oh, there's a lot of
that
talent
is
behind
the
them.
Cream,
There's usually like
absolute
somebody
cream
like
of the crop.
yeah. There's usually somebody like Quincy Jones behind
There's
them.
Quincy
Yeah.
Jones, and that's
Making
who.
them-
That's
yeah.
who's at the top of the
All right. Yeah.
hierarchy,
Well,
and that's where the inequality is.
I was gonna go something and say something really controversial. All my musician friends are gonna hate me after this.
Okay.
But there's a article Barry was telling me about one time, where it was Pat Metheny, who's like at the top, the pinnacle of ability, right?
Yeah.
Was criticizing Kenny G. And if you read the thing that he says, it's like he just plays these runs that everybody likes. He just does things that pleases the audience. He's just like, please the audience, please the audience. You just hear the crowd cheer more and more.
Right.
It's like, had you read that framed just a little differently, it sounded like he was giving Kenny G a compliment.
Yeah, it could be. And the thing is, no matter what you think of either Pat Metheny or Kenny G,
They're
because
both good at their goals, what their goal is.
and they are also a lot more similar than you would
Oh,
than,
sure.
than you would think.
So here's the thing: is what I was saying is that the goals and
Because people think Pat Metheny is just as cheesy as Kenny G.
yeah, I was gonna say like depending
Some
on
of his
where
stuff sounds cheesy.
it is, yeah. And so where you were going with that, there are many peaks to climb
There's
within the
a lot of
music,
peaks to climb.
but with
the fact are there is peaks.
with the sports, there's less. There are less because you at the end of the day you either win the game or you don't.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Right.
But there's two aspects to it, right? There's the individual.
Yeah,
and then
that's
there's
another
the collective
complicated-
of the team.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess that's true because
and-
that's
yeah.
like Gad Sad always gets angry that people compare Messi to Fat Joe. Do you follow Gad Sad on social media?
Not really, but I am.
Oh,
I
you
know
should.
his stuff a lot.
Oh,
And
you should.
I watch
He's
his
great.
videos.
It's great. Yeah, his
but I
stuff's
know
great.
he's
It's funny.
really into Messi. But I don't even know who Fat Joe is.
Fat Joe. I always want to post this joke. It's like, okay, Gad Sad, I get you that Fat Joe's not all that good, but have you heard of this guy
Who
named
is Fat Joe?
Maradona? Is I'm saying his name right? Some guy
Maradona.
named Maradona. Yeah. I'm like, have you heard of this guy? As a joke, because that's who he means by Fat Joe.
Okay.
Yeah. So maybe I'll do that one of these days.
Yeah.
I'd like to get Gad Sad on here if I ever get enough views.
You probably could.
Yeah, I want to say
Yep.
like, hey, I used your book in my class and sold probably a couple hundred copies of your book for you.
Yeah.
Help a guy out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
He answered one of my questions on his.
Oh,
on his
right.
Ask Me Anything.
Did he? Yeah,
podcast.
that's great.
Yeah.
I think he answered one of mine and then went on like just like with the back of his hand, like nothing.
Oh, that's right. We both submitted to the same
Yeah.
one, right?
Uh-huh.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
yeah.
Did I tell you I learned an important lesson too, which is kind of trying to avoid conflicts on Facebook? Generally, I try to avoid like I don't like want to get in fights with my close friends,
Sure.
and I don't want to. I just
And this goes
can-
back to wanting to have a lot of
friends,
friends.
and
yeah.
I want to, and I know that if in person we had the conversation,
It would go way better.
yeah, exactly.
Oh, yeah.
And so one of my friends, I shared Julia Galef's a post of hers. Did I tell
Okay.
you about this?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, and I have absolute admiration.
Tell me the
for-
story again.
Well, I have absolute admiration for her and
Sure.
her and her podcast. So, like I love like almost everything she does,
Mm-hmm.
and it just reminds you that you should always kind of be honest to some degree, a way that you could stand behind.
Yeah.
Because I shared one of her posts, and a friend of mine critiqued her, maybe said a few like names and stuff, and I could have steelmanned and pointed out where the commonalities were, because
Mm-hmm.
I think it could be very easily misinterpreted, which is almost kind of the point of her post.
Right.
And she replies to him and defends herself,
Mm-hmm.
where I just sort of said, yeah, that's, I can see that. I kind of just didn't defend or
Right.
didn't engage.
Okay, so
And
she's
so-
your hero,
And I got
and you had a
embarrassed.
chance to like defend her while she was watching.
And she saw
You
that.
blew it.
I know. And so it was a perfect lesson for me of how to balance those two things. You got to kind of always try to be, and I'm really grappling with that. Like Sam Harris has that book about lying, like almost taking it to an extreme, that there's probably some element of the truth in there that you could say without, completely pissing off your friend
Yeah,
and without looking bad.
yeah, I
you
agree.
know,
Yeah,
yeah. So
yeah, yeah. I like just letting people say their opinion and then not shitting all over it. And,
yeah.
well, like, there's time and place for everything, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the short story of her point
But I
was-
do want people to shit on my arguments. Like, it's like if I say something bad,
but in good faith, right?
in good faith,
Yeah.
and even if it's not in good faith, it's okay too, because it's like,
I don't know.
maybe
I've experienced that too
there's
much.
like a bit of truth, or if there isn't, it shouldn't bother me that somebody.
I'll take this. I like the second one.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how often I get something like, "Okay, in saying A, I am not saying B,"
Yeah.
and then the next response is, "How dare you say B?"
Yeah.
That I lost a friend recently
Mm-hmm.
over that. Maybe because something in their life had, was kind of touchy.
Sure. Yeah.
But as somebody who I only see on Facebook, I didn't know that.
Okay. Yeah.
So I said something that offended them.
Yeah.
And I meant something totally different, and everybody chose the worst version.
Yeah.
Even after I said, by saying A, I am not saying B.
Right. Yeah.
I couldn't have spelled it out, I thought, any more clearly.
Yeah.
And they cussed me out on Facebook and deleted me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh,
So
well.
it goes.
Yeah. But, if I see that person, I now that I know what happened, what was going on in their life,
Right. Yeah.
I would be like, yeah, no worries.
Yeah. Yeah. I do see that online where there's like, I don't participate in any online discussions ever. Never.
You
have.
don't. Yeah. I would like you to.
And it's I see friends getting into really horrible arguments with other friends. It's
Although I've
like-
done that in person too.
Yeah, in person it's okay because I mean we've done that a lot
Yeah.
too, right?
Yeah, as a band.
Yeah, and I remember we'd have these massive arguments
And
that
then
went on till
and at
4 in the morning,
Yeah,
and then the next day there'd be this group text.
Like,
Sorry
man."
about how I
Yeah.
acted last night.
Yeah.
It's-
and it always worked out.
and it always
Yeah.
worked out. So
Yeah.
it's
Something drastically different about being in person than there is
Yeah.
with the
Yeah.
online
Yeah.
communication.
for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah, yeah, because there's something about arguing where it's like, even if you're really disagreeing with somebody, when you're doing it
Almost
face to face,
always.
it's almost like there's still an element of I like you,
Yeah.
I respect your opinion, and that's why I'm continuing to talk to you.
Well,
and even
I
if
don't
we're
always
arguing,
respect their opinion.
that's true. Sure,
I respect them
Yeah.
as a person.
respect them as a
And I
person.
know that they're not a sociopath.
Yeah,
And I know that there are something common deep down, a value that we share.
yeah.
That,
And we should all learn to steel man. I think
Yeah.
steel manning
Oh my
is
gosh,
like
that's the
such
most
a
important thing.
that's one of the best things I've
Yeah.
learned in the past couple of years is the
Oh, me too.
concept of steel manning. And
I never learned that in college. It was from Julia Galiff,
oh, okay,
who
yeah,
I
yeah.
embarrassed myself.
Yeah. And I learned it online too. I learned
Yeah.
it from, I don't know where I learned it from, but I know that it was best implemented when Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris were arguing the existence of God or not, and it was being moderated by Brett Weinstein.
Oh, okay.
And he got them to steel man each other's positions.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really enlightening,
Yeah.
to hear both sides of the coin, both sides of the argument, giving the opponent the best version of their argument.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's something that's needed more,
Right.
just in general. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's pretty cool. I mean, it's a way to bridge differences, I guess.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because I mean, only 1 in 100 people are psychopaths. So
Exactly.
yeah, it's
So,
not likely
yeah,
you're friends
exactly.
with one. If you've already kind of filtered people out of your community
Yeah.
to begin with.
Yeah, and you know, maybe this could tie into what we said at the beginning and close it off here, is that, you know, it's a good, you know, a good theme of this whole conversation was having friends that are vastly different from
Yeah.
you and maintaining those friendships.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it probably goes a long way just in terms of everybody's even the longevity of the country.
Yeah.
I'll even go as far as saying that,
Mm-hmm.
because then we won't be torn apart by provincialism and political differences.
Yeah.
And I think that's
All the stuff that's going
that's
on.
important.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Jeff, for, you know, giving me your time. I really enjoyed this conversation. And
Me too.
it's too bad Jason had to leave early.
Yeah.
But, you know, people have to work, I guess.
Unfortunately,
Yeah.
we do.
Yeah. So, but thank you. Let's do it again.
Okay,
Yeah.
sure.
All right. Thank
All
you.
right.